Hey everybody, Dr. Jared Skowron from Spectrum Awakening. Hope everybody is doing well. Today we're going to be talking about stimming. Now another word for stimming is stereotypies or stereotyping. And this is a very common symptom in our kids. What this is, stimming and stereotypies or stereotypies, these are repetitive movements. And these repetitive movements are very common in our kids. Some kids have small levels of them and some kids have them all the time, okay? So for those of you who, want to know, does your child stim? And what's the difference between a stim and a tic? The stimming or the stereotypy is a repetitive motion. Now these repetitive motions are normally induced by excitement. And these repetitive motions are different from tics because a motor tic, not like a tick the animal, the bug, but a motor tic. A motor tic is something that normally is not as frequent. And so like a tic, if I were to pretend to have a tic, another star donation from Kim, thanks Kim. If I were to have a motor tic, it would kind of like, let's say I had a facial motor tic, it would kind of be like a little bit of this kind of action, and I would know I was doing it, and I would be trying to stop the tic, which happens with a lot of people, but it's kind of out of my control. Versus a stim, a stereotypy is usually with the hands, and there's a lot of flapping, or kids will kind of twist their hands like this or jump around. Those kind of stims, and Christy, thanks for the stars. Those kind of stims are much more frequent and much more repetitive versus the kind of motor tics, which are sometimes a shoulder, sometimes a face, sometimes you get these kind of little vocal tics, which is another motor tic, but it doesn't have that type of repetitiveness that a stim does, okay? So that's kind of the difference. And some kids, like I mentioned, will stim when they're excited. They'll kind of be their normal selves. When they get excited, they really stim, as is happening in my March Madness bracket after Illinois lost. There was a lot of stimming at my house. Or some kids who are more severe will kind of stim all the time. Like all the time, they're always flapping and they're always moving, okay? So we get that in the kids who are more severe. But any of that, it doesn't matter how much stimming you have, stimming is a symptom that we need to look at, okay? And, what do we do with those stims? And in the way I look at it, and the way I talk to families about it, is that the stims are a way for the child to feel better, okay? The stims help the child deal with how they're feeling. Now, us as an outsider may see it as something that's not socially acceptable. We're like, well, geez, that behavior really makes you look unique, and people may question, and kids may question, or teachers, or family, or just strangers, or whoever, and be like, hey, you know what, there's something that's different about that kid, okay? So, we as parents don't want that. We don't want that kind of feeling going toward our child, and so we may want to suppress the stim, but from a medical perspective, I don't think there's anything dangerous about the stim as long as they're not physically hurting themselves. It's a way for them to feel good, okay? Social acceptance is a different story, but we've got to figure out the stimming. It is a sign, it is a symptom of something going on internally. So I use stimming kind of as a symptom for how severe are things in a certain part of the body medically. And as the stimming improves, that's a physical objective finding that we can say, hey, look, our treatments are working because this is getting better, okay? So don't think of it as something bad, but think of it as something that we can use as a marker to improve on, all right? And as long as we understand that this makes our kids feel good, then when it's, if you want to let it happen, let it happen. Again, behaviors, if we don't want the behavior outside, it's tough for them to do it when they're inside, not when they're outside, yada, yada, I get it. But let's talk about why this happens. Now, there is a multitude of different things that can cause the stimming. And there's kind of like, I want to describe an assembly line, I want to describe a process that can cause the stimming and cause the stereotypies, and talk about which part of that process your child might be on. So your child might be part of the whole train, the whole train process from like A to B, or just like B to C, or like instead of A to Z, that process, maybe your child is just M to Z, if that makes sense. And, but where in that assembly line process does your child create the stim and create the stereotypy? And that will really tell us how we intervene and how we treat, because different types of treatments are going to be more or less effective depending on where your child is on that assembly line or on that train process, to the stims and the stereotypy from the eventual cause. So we're going to talk about that through the scientific research. So I'm just going to jump into the research right now, and a lot of great live questions, so I'm going to get to as many of those as possible. So let me talk about the research, and that'll talk about the assembly line of the process. So, and let me just, before we get into the research, I'll just kind of describe it briefly. The top of this process in some people, and thanks Jill for the stars, a lot of people donating stars today, thanks guys, we're going to send it all to Taka and Autism Hope Alliance. The assembly line can start with a GI infection. Okay, that can be yeast, that can be candida, that can be mold, that can be bacteria, that can be parasite, whatever. It's a gut infection. Okay, that gut infection causes changes in the entire body. All right, now the first thing it does is change an immune response. With an immune response, you start getting changes to your cortisol. That's your stress hormone. Okay, so the stress response is going to can be from that infection. Also, different organisms, different infections in the gut will release chemicals. They get into the bloodstream, get up to the brain, and affect our anxiety centers. And our anxiety centers are controlled by a brain chemical or a protein called GABA. Okay, so all of a sudden we have effects on our anxiety and therefore on our behavior because of the chemicals created by that infection. All right, and that infection will also alter levels of other brain chemicals such as serotonin, which makes us happy and calm, and dopamine, which makes us concentrated. Makes us concentrate. So you see this assembly line that can start with a gut infection, which affects cortisol, stress hormones, which affects the immune system, and affects brain chemistry. So anywhere along that assembly line, your child may be. So not all kids have these gut infections. A lot do, okay? But not all of them do. They may have the stimming from the imbalances of cortisol and the imbalances of the brain chemistry, but not have the infection. Or you could have all of those, okay? So we want to make sure we're going to test and treat all these different levels. So let me walk you through it with the scientific research, and we'll kind of go from there. Okay. First research study from 2019 looks at a descriptive review on the prevalence of gastrointestinal disturbances and their multiple associations with autism spectrum disorder. Now, on the back here in the conclusion, it talks about how GI dysfunctions are of particular relevance in ASD and autism. There are connections between the central nervous system and the gut, such as impaired parasympathetic activity and increased endocrine stress response. So the stress response is your cortisol. And again, cortisol is going to affect your immune system. It's going to affect autoimmunity. It's going to affect your stimming. It's going to affect your temper. And the other thing that was interesting is that it impairs parasympathetic activity. Parasympathetic activity is the relaxing part of the nervous system. It calms you down, it makes you chill and relax, it makes you poop, okay? If you don't have that parasympathetic activity, you're not relaxed, so you're more hyper, and you're constipated because you can't poop. And Michelle just sent over some stars. Thank you, Michelle. So that's the first study that kind of associates these gut infections with more. This is association between stereotypies and cortisol with autism. And again, cortisol is that stress hormone. And as I tell all of our patients, we've been talking about these lives for years, okay? I can't even read that even with my cheaters. The hell does that say? Sorry. The aspect of stereotypy behaviors that was most powerfully related to cortisol was general repetitive behaviors, okay? So, general repetitive behaviors, the stereotypy associated with cortisol imbalances. Again, that's that stress hormone. Where does that stress hormone cortisol, where does the abnormality come from? Well, it can be from an infection, or it can just be from other issues like toxicity that affect stress response, okay? Here we have elevated repetitive behaviors are associated with lower salivary cortisol levels in autism. So high rates of repetitive behaviors are evidence of lower cortisol levels, okay? And again, this is why we test cortisol levels with almost all of my patients. We do a urine test through your local lab that's gonna look at cortisol levels and tell you if it's high or low. Next, autism-like behavior and rescue through GABA. So these stereotyped behaviors and social interaction deficits had to do with the GABA neurotransmission that's impaired by these issues, okay? So again, GABA. What is GABA? GABA is a protein, but GABA works directly, the GABA protein or amino acid works directly on the brain to reduce anxiety. And that, when that child is anxious, you start to get these repetitive behaviors, okay? I look at my March Madness bracket and I get anxious because I picked UConn. Oh, bad choice. So more anxiety, okay, because GABA levels are less that cause the stereotype behavior. Where does that decrease in GABA come from? It can come from genetics, it can come from an infection, it can come from a nutrient deficiency, all right? What's next? And Kai says, what test do you use to test for cortisol levels? We do a urine cortisol test. Plain, simple, local lab, insurance, done, okay? Here's stereotypic movement disorders. The pathophysiology or the cause of these stereotypes involves blah, 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 dopamine pathways and underactive choline and GABA pathways as well. So it involves, and Nabila, thank you for donating stars. So we've now associated dopamine. We've associated GABA. We've associated cortisol with these causes, the biological cause for the this stimming. Okay, dysfunction GABA signaling mediates autism-like stereotypies. Okay, a dysfunction in the GABAergic neurons contributes to numerous neuropsychiatric phenotypes, including the ones that have the stimming involved. All right, so can we just give GABA and the stimming reduces? Yep, we can, okay? Here's another study that talks about the use of a pharmaceutical, but a GABA agonist. That means a pharmaceutical that makes GABA function work more in the brain, okay? Is that work for a treatment for autism? Well, it does. It does help. The GABA will help with these things, all right? And last research study, and then we'll go into, what type of treatments we can use. This research study talks about a specific gene. Now, I'm not worried about this gene because that's not the point of what I want to make from the study, but decreased gene associated with symptom severity in children with autism. So this gene that they talk about, and again, I'm not worried about this gene, but these gene levels in children were significantly lower than in control groups. When that gene was lower, it decreased levels of serotonin and dopamine. And this is what we see in our testing when we test our kids. Again, how many thousand kids have I tested their dopamine and serotonin? Regular urine tests, regular labs, go through insurance. You're going to get analysis of your serotonin levels, your dopamine levels, and when they're low, okay, and you have the stimming and you have the stereotypy and you treat it, then the stimming decreases. We've done this for so many kids. So let me now that we've shown the research, let me kind of walk through how we can intervene, okay? And the question is, we've got these three different areas of the body that can be contributing to the stimming and the stereotypy, and we can test and treat at any of those three levels, okay? Number one, do we have some kind of gut infection, all right? Because if you got a gut infection, you can use these other treatments, and they'll work a little bit, but man, until you get rid of that gut infection, you're kind of SOL, and you got to take care of that first, all right? Then you've got this cortisol imbalance, okay? So you can test the cortisol through your local lab, urine collection, bam, you got your cortisol levels. Most of the time, they're gonna be low, all right? We've seen them high before. 9 times out of 10 in my kids, it's low. Then you're going to test your brain chemistry. Are I'm reading questions as they pop up. Are the serotonin levels and dopamine levels also low? You can test that through the urine, through your local labs. And if it is low, we're going to treat it. So if you got the gut infection, you treat that. If you have low cortisol, you treat that. If you got low brain chemistry, you treat that. How do you treat it, you ask? I'm so glad you asked. We treat by giving the brain the vitamins it uses to make those. We are what we eat, okay? Our cortisol, our bones, our skin, our sweat, our everything is made from our food, including the chemistry and the chemicals in our brain that make us happy or sad or stim, okay? So we want to really increase serotonin. We want to increase dopamine. We want to increase GABA. We want to increase cortisol. okay, to keep them in normal ranges. All right, we want that normal range. We want to give natural support to put it in that normal range. So how do we do that? Well, first, let's talk about GABA. I love GABA, been using GABA for almost 20 years because it works so well in our kids. Now, with GABA, dose matters, all right? A lot of supplements on the market I've seen with 100 milligrams of GABA, maybe 50 milligrams of GABA. In my opinion, it's not enough. So in our Power and Focus supplement, again, this is our number one, product that we use, there is 750 milligrams of GABA in here. So it's a nice, treatable dose of GABA to help with the stimming and the stereotypies, okay? We also have a little bit of GABA in our Common Cool supplement, not too much, but a little bit, and that's mixed with taurine and theanine and inositol and magnesium, which is beneficial as well. Medicine is Goldilocks, okay? Not to remember Goldilocks, not too little, not too much, just right. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. This is with everything in medicine. With everything in medicine, you want a healthy amount. You don't want too much and you don't want too little. So with serotonin, that's why we're going to test. We're going to test, and if we increase serotonin too much, then we're going to give the treatment that is accurate. And I've never seen serotonin syndrome in someone who was not on an SSRI, on an antidepressant. Okay, and serotonin syndrome, while theoretical, is very rare. None of our kids have had it, period. So GABA, important. Those are the supplements that we have with GABA. Again, the Power and Focus is the biggest one, and then Common Cool, and of course you can get GABA over the counter. Next, serotonin and dopamine. Those are easy peasy to support because they're just made from different foods, okay? So we've got a supplement called Super Serotonin Support. All right, this is chewable 5-HTP. Okay, 5-HTP is the protein that is used to make serotonin. There's a couple other vitamins involved. We've got a couple of those in our product. That'll make more serotonin, okay? You want dopamine, we use a product called Attention on the Double. This is a nice tasteless powder that has the nutrients to make more dopamine. All right. The great thing is when we use these, stimming improves, stereotypies improve, and normally language improves. So we want to make sure we're balancing the GABA, balancing the dopamine, balancing the serotonin in healthy levels and healthy ranges. And getting excess on these is really difficult. Next, the cortisol. I don't have many cortisol supplements. I didn't bring my cortisol supplements in front of me, unfortunately, but we've got a few. We have Temper Tamer, we have Sanity Saver, and we have Pregnenolone. Okay, those three supplements help balance cortisol levels, and in so many of my kids help with the stimming and the stereotypies. All right, and remember, the stimming and stereotypies are not bad in and of themselves. They're a sign that something's going on. Okay, and then if you want to back up all the way to the top and talk about infections, then you can either test the infections, with a stool test or an OAT test, or just treat it. Okay, now for treatment, we have something called the yeast mold bundle. Okay, and the yeast mold bundle has a biofilm enzyme, herbs to kill the bugs, and a chelator. Okay, so those three different supplements will help dissolve biofilms, will help kill the bugs, and will help bind the toxins so your die-off reactions are less. We've got a brand new supplement we launched last week called Paraslayer. Paraslayer has all of that together. It's got the enzymes, it's got the herbs, it's got the binders, it's got the prebiotic, it's got a probiotic. It's got all that in one if your kid can swallow pills, okay? This stuff, don't open these pills. It tastes nasty. I opened it up myself. It was bad. It was like exorcist vomiting, my neck spinning around, disgusting tasting stuff, but man, is it potent. If you can swallow pills, Paraslayer, where to go. Paraslayer is amazing, but our yeast mold bundle is a great alternative. There's a lot of other treatments out there on the market that will kill these bugs, okay, whether they're natural or pharmaceutical. But as long as you guys have the idea of this assembly line, of this train process, okay, it can start with an infection. Doesn't have to. That infection will alter cortisol levels, alter GABA levels, alter brain chemistry, serotonin, dopamine levels, and those things are what are causing the stimming. You don't have to have the infection. You could just have the abnormalities in the GABA and the cortisol and the brain chemistry from genetic reasons or nutritional reasons or toxicity reasons that can cause the stimming and stereotypies. So that's kind of the total picture of the things you may want to treat to improve your kids' stimming. So